So today we have Dr. Marc Cohen in Australia, which is unique. Marc, I'm so glad that you were able to be with us this morning.
Well, thank you for the invitation to present and not have to sit on a plane for 20 hours. I'm sure the environment is happier and it's sort of much better for me, but although I don't get to see everyone's faces, so that's talk about the different dimensions of wellness today, and really give a bit of an overview of where I was at trying to create a master's program, a postgraduate master's program in wellness, and the different inputs into that, and that really does reflect on the nature of wellness, the multiple dimensions, multiple problems that it addresses, and also the different industry bodies and the applications of wellness in the community. And my background, I trained as a medical doctor. In America, I'd be MD, but here in Australia, I'm MBBS. That's the MD equivalent. Then I did 2 PhDs, one in Chinese medicine and one in biomedical engineering. I spent 20 years at university collecting doctorates. But I've always had the aim of studying wellness rather than illness. And Western medicine didn't really teach me that, so I had to create my own disciplines. And now I'm a professor at RMIT University, which is a large global university in Melbourne. We have about 75,000 students. And I think we're the first university in the world that has wellness as an official academic discipline. And for the last 4 years I've been leading this Master of Wellness program, which is a fully online program. And we have students from, I think, almost a dozen countries at the moment. I could answer any questions about my own background later, but I'll just go right into it. I just wanted to open up with a little thought for the day.
Hi, this is Michaela. Unfortunately, we had some technical audio issues with Marc's presentation that only lasted for about 2 minutes, but I didn't want to leave you with 2 minutes of dead air and have you wonder what the heck was going on here. So anyway, it gets resolved fairly quickly, and then we have no more
It's going to fall over.
The rest of the
it's
webinar,
not a stable
so
system.
I apologize for...
And all over the world we have health systems that are falling over. And like in all times, the health system really reflects just the political, social, cultural milieu of society. So the health system is not separate from that. And if you look at society generally, and certainly on a global level, it's not all well. All is not well in the world at the moment. And I think that the health system reflects that, but I think we're also at a stage where we need to think beyond national boundaries about what is not just good for us as individuals or as our community, but what is good globally, and we're coming up to the limits to growth. And I'm showing my age here, but I'm old enough to remember when this book, The Limits to Growth, came out in 1972. And that was one of the first books that sort of were looking at global issues and saying that we can't keep having economic growth forever. We can't keep burning fossil fuels. This is from 1999, updated edition. Then natural resources will decrease, population's increasing, industrial output and pollution are increasing, but it's not sustainable and it's all going to peak and then crash. And we really need to restructure how society is working because we've reached the limits to growth on a finite planet. And we're now seeing that 40 years later, with climate change representing the greatest and widest ranging failure ever seen. The Stern report a few years ago said, business as usual is not an option, and that we need to invest 1% of our GDP at the moment to prevent a 20% decline in our GDP. And this is around the world, nations around the world. Similarly, we have a toxic pollution problem globally, toxic chemicals in commercial use, about 100,000 new chemicals into the market every year, chemicals. And POPs, or persistent organic pollutants, are now found everywhere on the planet. They're in our food, our soil, our air, and our water, and they're in our bodies. And that we know that combinations of toxins are actually more potent and more toxic than individual toxins. Yet when we do safety profiles of toxins, we generally do it on individual toxins before they're released into the market. So essentially we're all part of a big global experiment, and each one of us, every person on the planet now, has a unique cocktail of toxins based on their personal history and their geography, where they live and how they live. And we also know that wildlife and humans around the planet carry these persistent organic pollutants in their bodies at levels that can cause injury. So they're not just something that a forensic scientist could look at and tell you where you come from. These are toxins in your body that are affecting your organ function. Radioactive waste has become an issue because of Japan and the tsunami and earthquake in Japan and the reactors there. But we know that there is increasing radioactive waste on the planet. About 12,000 tons per year of radioactive waste, high-level radioactive waste, is being produced. And we already know that there are a number of incidents where radioactive material has been improperly disposed of, improperly transported, or abandoned or stolen. So this is just an increasing burden of waste that affects us all. And we're paying for that in our bodies. These toxins, they bioaccumulate in fatty tissue, and we don't normally excrete fatty tissue, but women do have a unique excretion method, which is through breast milk. And there's a study that was done by my colleagues at RMIT University in 1995 where they looked at DDT and DDE in breast milk, and they found that infants were regularly exposed to pesticides through their mother's breast milk at levels that were greater than they calculate that for mature adults who have mature liver detoxification systems and mature immune systems. Yet these infants were getting 3 times the adult acceptable daily intake, even though they were infants with immature detoxification pathways. Now that's not saying that breast milk is not the best milk. Breast is certainly best in terms of infant nutrition, but I think it's a tragic statement to think that mothers are literally poisoning their children because they're excreting the poisons out of their own body. There are issues with wealth inequality at the moment, where the richest 2% of the planet own more than 50% of global wealth, and the poorest 50% of adults own barely 1%. Hopefully you can hear me, because I'm getting funny signals. Talking about obesity and that is literally starving, and you could almost divide the world into third of the world which is overfed, a third of the world which is underfed, and a third of the world which is starving. About 3 billion people in the world at the moment today struggle to live on around $2. I've just gone through a whole list of major world problems. I was just saying that they're not in isolation. These are interrelated problems, and the solutions are not in isolation. We need holistic solutions, and wellness represents a solution to multiple problems, but there are different ways to implement it, and really to understand what is wellness, and there are many definitions at the moment. There's a few that I like. One is the constant, conscious pursuit of living life to its fullest potential. Another one that I like, state of high consciousness, where you can be fully present in the moment, where actions flow naturally and authentically from the deep inner well of your being. Well, wellness is just a state where you look, feel, perform, and stay well. And the idea is that wellness actually enables you to experience the greatest fulfillment and enjoyment from life and to achieve the greatest longevity. So wellness is actually a form of preventive medicine, because if you're well, you'll live longer. And one of the issues here, and all the different definitions and the people who look at wellness, accept that wellness is actually holistic and multidisciplinary. There are multiple dimensions of wellness, including physical, psychological, sexual, emotional, social, cultural, spiritual, educational, occupational, financial, environmental, ethical, political, and existential. And this list is not exhaustive. So while you have different wellness tools and diagnostics and inventories that look at 5 or 6 or 12 dimensions, wellness has multiple dimensions. And if any one of these dimensions is compromised, your well-being is compromised. So that's on a sort of personal, individual level looking at wellness. But then wellness is not just a multidimensional personal thing. It's a global industry cluster that's also multidimensional. And one of the roles I play, I sit on the board of an organisation called the Global Spa Summit. And every year we put on a sort of high-level conference for the spa industry, and we commission research. And last year we commissioned SRI International, the Stanford Research Institute, to do an econometric study of the global wellness industry. And they estimate that the global wellness industry is a $1.9 trillion market, but it's made up of multiple different industry sectors. The largest being beauty and anti-aging, $679 billion. And then the second is fitness and mind-body, $390 billion. Healthy eating and nutrition, weight loss, $276 billion. And then there are other sectors, prevention and personalised health at $243 billion. We've got alternative and complementary medicine, around $113 billion. Wellness tourism and medical tourism, spa at $60 billion. And then the smallest, but I think one of the areas that have the greatest potential to grow is workplace wellness. Currently that's only a $30 billion global market. So it's tiny when you compare it to anti-aging and beauty, which is $679 billion. But I think there's a great opportunity to expand that area. That full report of this study is available at globalsparsummit.org. You can download the full report. But this particular slide, I think, is a great summary. The full report breaks it down by region of the world and different industries. So yeah, wellness is multidisciplinary. It also involves multiple industries. And it's been accepted for some time now that wellness is actually a spectrum or a continuum. And my friend and colleague, Jack Travis, who spent half the year in Australia and half the year in the US, and he now is an adjunct professor at RMIT University, and he teaches into our Masters of Wellness program. In the 1970s, he came up with the idea of the wellness-illness continuum, where you had the sickness paradigm, where you've got disability symptoms and signs being treated. So that's what we call the treatment paradigm, which brings people to the neutral point. But then the wellness paradigm continues on from that through awareness, education, and growth to high-level wellness. And at the bottom, you can see I've got a little normal distribution curve there, where you have ill health, average health, and enhanced health. And that was my dilemma, because in Western medicine, when I was studying medicine, it really taught me a lot about ill health and how to get people back to neutral. It didn't tell me much about enhanced health, how to get people thriving and functioning in optimal ways. Some wellness looking on its head and created the wellness-illness vortex or spiral, where you can divide the continuum into 3 dimensions or 3 areas. Below a defined line we have ill health, and that bottom area is defined, or that bottom line is defined by how we define disease. So it's a blood pressure reading, a blood sugar reading, a symptom pattern in an ICD manual, etc. Then in the middle area we have average health, which is when you're in the middle of that normal distribution, so you're not sick, so you're not complaining necessarily, but you're not fantastic either. Then we have a less well-defined line, the dotted green line there, above which we have enhanced health. And that upper line is much harder to study and do research around because that upper line is multidimensional. All those dimensions I mentioned previously, so it's much harder to define. But we have this idea that there is a continuum where you have enhanced health, and in some philosophies, philosophical systems, there's the idea of perfect health, when you're at one with the universe and everything is total bliss. Life is an epiphany. We can't all get there, be enlightened, but there is this idea that there is a state of perfect health. Now, generally Western medicine gets people, or tries to move people from below that illness line back to average, whereas complementary medicine is more the wellness paradigm, which moves people up from wherever they are. So there are some areas of complementary medicine that parallel Western medicine, but others that take people who are average and make them enhance their health. And you could probably argue that anybody with enhanced health are using things in their lifestyle that we would call complementary therapies, and whether that's their diet, their exercise routine, or the way they relate or manage their stress. Enhanced health requires a conscious lifestyle effort to actually make that part of everyday routine. Now, as we go up this spiral, our flexibility of response increases. That vortex gets wider. And that means our resilience increases. So the higher up you are, the more you're able to cope with stress, the more you're able to deal with complex issues in your environment, in your world. So you have a greater homeostatic range or flexibility of response. The higher up you are also, the further you've got to fall. So the further away you are from disease. So the best prevention is actually to be as high up on this spiral as possible, because then not only can you resist disease, you've got a long way before you actually succumb to disease. Now, there are always things that will bring us down, known as, we call them the stressors, and they can be financial, they can be interpersonal, they can be to do with injury or aging or trauma or disease, or just psychological issues. We all have stressors, and I think that they're very well documented. What is less well documented, I think, are things that bring us up. I call them blissors, the things that move us towards bliss. And these are now the subject of positive psychology, the things that give positive emotion, social connectivity, flow activities that actually create bliss in our lives, that move us up, that increase our flexibility response. And to finish off the picture, like any good vortex, tornado would have an axis in the middle, which represents a still point. And that still point is often talked about in spiritual and religious settings as saying that that's our immortal self. That's the part of us that never changes, that's connected to everything that is, and that's totally stable. That's our homeostatic set point that we're actually trying to get to. And this homeostatic set point is a point of total balance and equilibrium. And when you have total equilibrium, you have no change and no movement. So this point is totally stable and eternal. And again, just to finish the picture, when talking about illness and wellness, there's a great story from a yogi, Swami Satchidananda, who's the founder of integral yoga. And there's a story of how they were talking about illness and wellness, and someone asked Swami Satchidananda, what's the difference between illness and wellness? And without speaking, he went up to the board and drew a circle around the I in illness, and then another circle around the we in wellness, and then went and sat down. And I think there's a lot in that when you're sick, it's all about me. It's all about what's happening for you when you're sick. When I'm sick, it's about me. When you're sick, it's about you. Whereas when you're well, there's an outward-looking focus about other people, and it's about we, it's about sharing. Now, this vortex, this three-dimensional illness, wellness vortex, I want to play with that model a little bit. I think it gives a nice conceptual framework for visualizing wellness. And I've done a mapping of that to the concepts of Chinese medicine, of TCM. I did a PhD in traditional Chinese medicine, relating it to thermodynamics and information theory, and I don't want to bog people down, but I want to just give people another conceptual framework, and if anyone has a TCM background, they might appreciate it a bit more. But there are 5 basic philosophical concepts in traditional Chinese medicine. One is the Tao, the other is Qi, so I'm going to explain it in a second. The other is the 5 elements or 5 phases, Yin and Yang, and the law of Bu and Qi. So the Tao is, it can be translated to the idea of absolute infinity, or pure experience, the pure infinite and indescribable nature of experience. Qi can be related to the idea of flow, of movement, of communication. The 5 elements, with a symbol for each of these, to the idea of transformation. And there's a lot of discussion in the literature saying 5 elements is not the correct English translation. It really should be the 5 phases of transformation, which is a more apt description, because Chinese philosophy is very functional and flowing. The idea of yin and yang translates to the idea of balance, and Bu and Qi to the idea of evolution and entropy. I'm going to expand on that a little bit. They're the basic philosophical concepts of TCM. And we translate that into our wellness model, we can see that with this vortex, for the vortex to be sustained like any vortex, water down your plug hole or a tornado, it's the flow through the vortex that actually creates the vortex. And lower down, you've got lesser flow. Higher up, where the vortex is wider, you've got a higher flow. And I'll relate that to the bandwidth of entropy that can flow through a system. And that flow is actually transformed in the vortex to create the vortex. So as soon as the flow stops, as soon as the water stops flowing down the bath hole, the vortex of water stops. And it's the actual vortex causes the transformation to create the structure. Now, our bodies are like that. We have to be open systems to be alive. We have to eat, we have to excrete, we have to inspire and expire. It's the matter, energy, and information that flows through us that literally creates us. And we use that matter, energy, and information and transform it to create our lives and our bodies. So we have negative entropy in. I could talk about a negative entropy gradient, where negative entropy is things like food, fuel in a car, things that we can get energy from and use to transform. And then we have the entropy out, where we necessarily, the second law of thermodynamics says that in every transformation there is entropy produced. In any isolated system, entropy will increase. So entropy production is greater than 0. But there is a point of balance, the idea of yin and yang, between negative entropy in and entropy out, or order in and disorder out. And finally, the idea of evolution and entropy, where you have a decreasing spiral representing a increasing disorder, and an increasing spiral going up, which is an increasing order. It's not just order, it's the ability to transform. So you could think, whether you're going up the evolutionary scale, higher organisms have a greater capacity to transform their environment and produce entropy. So it means we can do more and we can transform more, but we also produce more waste. And that's a necessary thing. To be alive, you need to produce waste. It's the ability to export entropy that that actually helps us maintain our own internal order. But when we're looking at this, there's that point of balance, which is really interesting, because at that exact point of balance, the production of entropy is actually zero. So the order in is totally balanced by the order out, and that's that axis I was talking about, the point of homeostatic set point, that point of perfect balance, of equilibrium. And that is the point where you can experience bliss, or where you're totally present and aware in that moment. And in this whole model then, wellness is actually a point of minimum entropy production. And it doesn't matter how high or low you are on that spectrum, at any point in that spectrum, if you have that point of balance, you have minimum entropy production, you have access to bliss, but you actually have a perfectly balanced and matched system. So hopefully that wasn't too technical for people that aren't familiar with the concept of thermodynamics, but there's this balance between anabolism and catabolism, of building things up and breaking things down, of consumption and creation, challenges in our lives and our capacity to meet those challenges, of being and doing. And within that, I relate wellness to the state of minimum entropy production, or the idea where these forces are fully balanced in our lives. So looking at in our lives, I talked about blissors, the activities that move us up, that counteract the stressors or balance out the stressors. And for many years I was in the medical faculty teaching complementary medicine, and I used to talk about the pillars of complementary medicine as being the SENS model. And the SENS model was an acronym that stands for stress management, exercise, nutrition, social and spiritual interaction, and education. And to me that just made sense, that these are the things you can do to improve your health and well-being. And it's also, these are things that you can do to complement any other treatment that you're having. So if you're having drugs or surgery, there are other things you can do that will complement those treatments, and you can manage your stress better, you can improve your nutrition, you can move better, you can interact with other people in the universe better, and you can learn. Mind you, these are all things that you need to do for yourself. And as a doctor, I used to have people come to me who had major issues going on in their lives, and they weren't well, and that had all Western medicine, surgery and drugs addressed to them, and they were still unwell. And rather than take on the responsibility that I needed to fix them, I would very clearly say, these are the things I can do for you. I can monitor your condition, I can recommend or diagnose or prescribe these things, but these are the things you can do for yourself. And then outlined improving their ability to manage stress, of moving, eating, interacting better. And actually, as a doctor, the major role that I felt was to educate. And in fact, the word doctor comes from the Latin docere, which means to teach. And there's a role for the medical community to teach people to then not need medicine, because they can be doing these lifestyle wellness activities. So I talked earlier about the health system around the world. PricewaterhouseCoopers came out with a report, HealthCast 2020, a few years ago, that said that there is evidence that the current health systems of the world are or will be unsustainable if unchanged over the next 15 years. And that consumers need to play a much larger role in their own health care, and that preventive care and disease management programs have an untapped potential to enhance health status and reduce costs. Well, that's a real imperative, and that document goes into detail how to create sustainable health systems. But they're really, at the moment, we don't have health systems, we have disease systems, and we really have to shift that illness paradigm to a wellness paradigm. And just to give you an example of that, most people in the world at the moment, in the Western world, I know America's similar to Australia, around about 40% of people die literally of a broken heart. Now that's broken hearts is a romantic notion, but it's also a very real problem when you have cardiac tissue that's dying because of oxygen starvation and you have a heart attack and your heart literally breaks, the heart pump stops functioning and you die. So I mean, for me, that indicates a broken heart. But if you look at that, you know, when you have normal coronary arteries becoming thickened and then blocked and then starving the heart of oxygen, you know, there are different ways to address this. And there's a little quiz I'm going to give. You know, if you had angina pain, if you had blocked coronary arteries, you're getting heart pain, you know, out of two therapies, which would you choose? Treatment 1 or treatment 2? Now, treatment 1 would reduce the blockage in your arteries by 8% after 5 years. Treatment 2, the blockage would increase 28% after 5 years. Treatment 1 would be a 91% almost total reduction in pain. Treatment 2, the pain would almost double after 5 years. Treatment 1 would have a 50% reduction in hospitalisation and death compared to treatment 2. And treatment 1 is safer than treatment 2 and reduces other diseases. And treatment 1 costs around $400, whereas treatment 2 costs around $40,000. You know, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Who wants to spend $40,000 on treatment 2 when, you know, the much cheaper treatment 1 is safer and more effective? But every day in the Western world, we're writing checks for $40,000 for treatment 2, which you might have guessed is coronary artery bypass graft surgery. Whereas treatment 1 is intensive lifestyle change. And the lifestyle change is a low-fat vegetarian diet, moderate exercise, stress management training, and group support. And the data that I was quoting there was from a lifestyle heart trial by Dean Ornish, and the 5-year data was published in 1998. It's old news now in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And I understand last year that 15 years after most of this data was published, they've now accepted in some small way the Ornish program for heart disease on Medicaid and Medicare in the US. And they say that's about right. It takes 15 years to have research convert into clinical practice. So there is some movement there. But I remember reading this data in the early 90s when Dean Ornish did his first studies, and you know, he makes the comment that in the current health system, it's considered conservative treatment to strip a vein from your leg, open up your chest, and place that vein from your leg across a blocked artery in your chest, and repeat that every 10 years, where it's considered radical to relax, exercise, eat good food, and to share your feelings. Now, when I first came across this, I was really confused because I was a doctor working in the hospital health system, and I was doing treatment 1. I was involved with bypass graft surgery and doing these quite intensive treatments. And I thought, that's wrong. We should be doing treatment 2. We should be getting people to relax, exercise, eat good food, and share their feelings. And then I realised if you do the first one, you get $40,000. It's a huge industry. To do the second one is actually not a defined business model. There's no set, or at the time there was no set model of an industry that would profit from people to relax, exercise, eat good food, and share their feelings. Now, some years later, I actually discovered there was an industry that did that, which was the spa industry, which has as its business model getting people to relax, exercise, eat good food, and share feelings. And the wellness industry cluster that I described earlier is, I guess, a reflection of that model. And I think that's been translated into lifestyle practice and into the community through the LOHAS movement. The LOHAS stands for Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. Started mainly in Japan, but now it's a global movement. In the US, it's estimated about $300 billion consumer market. And the LOHAS consumers are people who will choose green energy, they'll eat organic food, they'll downsize, they'll buy hybrid cars, etc. And they're saying that that's about 30% of American consumers, because people are aware that now that they can take responsibility for their own health and their own lifestyles, and they're not as willing to hand over responsibility for their own life to doctors and other experts. And I think that the public are increasingly aware that there is a possibility to prevent disease, prevent aging, to optimize health and performance, and that there are deficiencies in conventional medicine, which is great for acute and care and trauma, but not so great for chronic disease, and that people need to invest in their own wellness. And more than 10 years ago now, Paul Pilzer came out with this book, The Wellness Revolution, as the next trillion-dollar industry. Well, he's been shown right, because as of 2010, it was estimated a $1.9 trillion industry. And within that, we talked about consumption. There's some general dietary recommendations that we can make. There's so many different diets. But in terms of dietary recommendations, another acronym I like to use is slow food. And people might have heard of the slow food movement, which is we're embracing local foods and food culture. But it can also be an acronym for seasonal, local, organic, and whole. So seasonal, local, organic, whole food is basically a wellness diet. It's also the diet that most of our great-grandparents would have had before modern agriculture. And there's a lot of different movements talking about the seasonality of food, or the food miles, the local production of food, the organic movement, fair trade movement, all around conscious consumption and around awareness of where our food comes from, when it was produced, where it was produced, how it's processed to get to us. And I've sort of coined the term consumerism, which relates to conscious and humane consumption. The idea is consumption with maximal awareness, efficiency, and enjoyment, and minimal pain, energy, waste, and pollution. And I think the idea that when we consume it, we should be consuming with maximal awareness, efficiency, but also maximal enjoyment to really get the most out of the things we consume. And really, the things we consume are the negative entropy inputs into our life, and to really transform them as much as possible, and then produce the least amount of pain, energy, waste, and pollution. That requires us to ask a whole lot of questions before we consume. So before we buy something or consume it ourselves, to ask, what is in it? Who made it? Where's it from? How did it get here? Who benefits from the sale? What use is it? Is it worth it? What's its life cycle and embodied energy? What's its environmental and social impact? What are the alternatives? Do I really need it? And the more that we ask these questions, the more that producers and manufacturers will address them in their manufacturing processes. And every time we buy something, every time we take out our wallet and consume something, we're actually voting for the world that we're going to live into. So we don't just vote every time there's an election. Literally every time we pull out our wallet, you can consider that a vote for what you want to create in the world, because whatever you buy will produce more of. And as I say, I think the more conscious we become of our consumption habits, it's a very effective and powerful way to change the world purchase by purchase. There's also the idea that just in our everyday lives, we can be more mindful and conscious of what's going on around us. And there's in the medical community, in the positive psychology community, there's a great awareness and research into mindfulness-based stress management, mindfulness meditation. And it's the idea of, representing William Blake's poem that says, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, holding infinity in the palm of your hand, eternity in an hour. And it's the idea that we are enmeshed in a universe where we can be totally present in any moment. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi coined the term flow as a joyous, self-forgetful involvement through concentration, which in turn is made possible by discipline of the body. And the idea with flow is that our challenges meet our skills, our capacity. We talk about the sweet point of balance being, the idea of wellness. So if we look at challenges versus capacity, if we have very few challenges and very little skills or capacity, we're apathetic. As the challenges go up, we become worried and then anxious and maybe panic attack. As our skills go up, we might just get bored. If we have high, medium skills and high challenges, we're aroused. High skills and low challenges, we're just relaxed. High skills, medium challenges, we're in control. So if we have high skills and high challenges, we enter this phase called flow. And flow actually requires challenges that totally involve our whole being. You can't get flow when you're bored or relaxed. You need to be challenged so you can rise to your full capacity and be totally engaged in that action. And it requires a physical action, so the joyous involvement through the body. So the idea of flow in everyday life, and they've done studies to say most people actually achieve flow at work, not on holidays, because their work is actually very engaging. And people can get a flow experience when they're driving or when they're fully engaged in a moment in an activity, so they actually become that activity. So that's some of the ideas around bringing wellness into everyday life. But in terms of bringing that into the, actualizing that, bringing that into the world, we're seeing that the development of new vocations, wellness coaching, workplace wellness and workplace wellness directors, positive psychologists, spa practitioners, permaculturalists. There are these new vocations which aren't yet controlled by registration boards and accreditation pathways, but we have quite an industry employing people with these skills. And I know the National Wellness Institute in the US have a certification program for bachelor programs where people can become certified wellness practitioners. They haven't yet done that for postgraduate programs, and we're waiting for that. But I think the move from an illness to wellness paradigm is seeing the development of these new vocations with a whole lot of professional issues, similar to the issues we have in medicine, healthcare at the moment, of confidentiality, ethical conduct, and adverse event reporting, complaints handling, etc., continuity of care, contact management, privacy, electronic records, and privacy issues around electronic record keeping, billing and third-party payment. You can read the list. There's a whole lot of professional issues that we're sort of facing. And I think the industry is moving ahead of accreditation and standards where we don't yet have, let's say, registration boards and professional associations that are addressing these issues. But in the education community, I think there are more programs that are addressing some of these new vocations and looking at wellness practices. And in workplace wellness, they have the idea of presenteeism, where you're not present at work, and where the estimates are that presenteeism is 4 times the cost of absenteeism to businesses, where people come to work and don't work. That's actually 4 times the cost of when people don't turn up to work at all. And then we have, workplaces are suffering under the burden of presenteeism, but then we have an industry such as the spa industry, which is about just being present. And how do we get people to be fully present in the moment? And massage and invoking the senses is a very powerful way to do that. We're also seeing that the development of global health services, and not through the medical world, but through the wellness world. There are really no global health providers in the medical world. There's no global GP clinics or hospital chains that you can get continuity of care globally. But 5-star hotels now are providing health services through their spas. And these health services have gone beyond, a manicure or pedicure or massage. They're actually now including nutritional consultations, medical consultations, naturopathic consultations, and really providing a wellness health service that is becoming a global service. And I think, it's the sort of obvious thing that no one really wants to go to a hospital, but everybody wants to go to a good hotel, and that the wellness industry will actually supplant the illness industry because it actually applies to everybody. Illness industry only applies to a very small percent of the population at any one time who are actively sick. But the wellness industry actually applies to everybody in the population because wellness is relevant to everybody, no matter where on that spectrum of illness and wellness they're at. Now, there's a lot of issues we have to address. A few years ago, I wrote a paper on detox, whether it's a science or a sales pitch, and actually concluded that at the moment, detox is a sales pitch, if not a science, because there are no, well-conducted randomized controlled trials showing that detox programs actually remove toxins from the body. But that's one area that we're growing as a science. So there's a lot more academic work and scientific work that needs to be involved with detox programs. And I talked about earlier about the toxicity problem in the world. Well, I think we need to build a science, which is a wellness science around reducing toxin profiles in people. There's also a huge issue of changing the perception about sustainability and how to live well. And again, I think the hotel, resort, spa community has a role here to model some of the behaviours. There's a photo here of the Six Senses Resort in Hua Hin, where they use basic design principles, local materials to create these beautiful structures that are also very functional, so that these structures are therapy rooms that don't need air conditioning because the water cools the air, and there are holes around the base of the rooms that draw in cool air and then release the hot air. And these principles sort of demonstrate that to be sustainable doesn't mean you have to sort of live in a hovel or wear hessian. You can actually have greater luxury when you're sustainable than when you're not. So for example, for me, it's much more luxurious to be in a room that has fresh, cool air than having a sealed room with air conditioning pumped into it. And there are other principles, natural swimming pools where the water is filtered through biofilters, which clean the water without chemicals. Non-swimming pools using earth. Celebrated architect, garbage warrior Michael Reynolds now has championed ways of designing houses that produce power, water, food, shelter, and are built out of recycled materials. The idea of permaculture, where we can create living environments around our houses, around our cities, that actually feed us and create a lifestyle that is really in tune with our lives and wellness principles that really enhance our well-being. Connection with nature is a big issue. There was a recent conference here in Melbourne called Healthy Parks, Healthy People, and a literature review of the literature of connection with nature was saying that we really underestimate the power of just natural connection to our health and well-being. And similarly, connection with animals has many physiological and psychological benefits, which some of it's been started to measure, but we're just recognising these benefits at the moment, but we really haven't got the metrics to start measuring them. And I think there's an important issue for the academic community. So how do we start measuring wellness? Because if we don't measure it, we can't manage it. If we don't state it, we can't communicate it. So, I think there's a lot of work, and I'm doing work with people around the world who are doing work around wellness metrics and wellness. In Australia, health insurance companies have an index, the Australia Unity Wellbeing Index, but that's actually been monitored around the world as the Personal Wellbeing Index. It's 8 simple questions on subjective well-being. In Australia, there's been 19 surveys since 2001. This has been done in more than 50 countries of subjective well-being. And when they've measured subjective well-being across the lifespan, it's interesting to see that they've done it for 12 and 13-year-olds, which have a very high subjective well-being score, around 77, 78. But then the well-being plummets in adolescence, hitting a bottom at around 16 and then comes back and is fairly stable throughout our lifespans before rising again in our 70s. And I think that's really telling to say that if you did a needs assessment across the lifespan, it's the adolescent community, our young people who are really suffering with the lowest well-being out of any other age group. And I think that makes intuitive sense, where adolescents often feel disconnected from society. They're not sure of their place, they're not sure of their peers, etc., where they should be going. We're running out of time, but other measures are, there's quality adjusted life years, and DALYs, disability adjusted life years that are being measured. Some of the banks have come up with quality of life assessments based on things like home ownership and employment and income and volunteer rates and crime rates, etc. Looking at social issues around how do you measure well-being of society. In companies, bottom line reporting gets a lot of verbiage, although there are a few companies that really have embraced it and embodied it in their business practices. There's the New Economics Foundation in the UK has come out with the Happy Planet Index, where they look at different countries and they measure their well-being of the country based on subjective well-being, life satisfaction, multiplied by life expectancy in that country to give you how many good life years you have, and they divide by the ecological footprint. And if you do that scale, and you can go to their website and look at the different countries and where they rate, I think Costa Rica rates as the happiest country in the world because they have very good longevity, good life satisfaction with a very small ecological footprint. So there are a number of wellness measures, I think, that we need to start looking at. There are subjective wellbeing measures. There's physiological status, and often that's considered as the most prominent, but through health risk assessments and functional measures. Social capital and connectedness is not well documented or measured. I mean, there's a lot of research now on social media and measuring social networks, but looking at social connectivity and social capital is in its early days. Ecological footprinting has started, and that's actually becoming more sophisticated. And then looking at human security, and socioeconomic analysis, and that's very well developed in terms of financial metrics. But I think to be well, we need to look across all of these 5 metrics of our subjective, physiological, social, ecological, and financial state. And in Australia, we come up with the idea with a wellness footprint, just like an ecological footprint. How can we measure a wellness footprint, although the methodologies for measuring that are not well developed yet. So there are some research questions we need to address. How do we measure wellness? How can we use these measures to look at disease, disability, performance? And what are the interventional policies that we can maximise wellness, not just for individuals, but for businesses and for our communities? So these are the questions we're addressing. We have our master's program, which is a fully online program, looking at these issues, and we have a lot of different courses on leadership and management.
Oh, wonderful, Marc. We did run over a little bit. I appreciate everyone hanging with us. A lot of good information from Marc. Sorry about the bumpy start. Technology is so good when it works. But thanks for hanging. Appreciate it. This has been recorded, and I am going to edit the heck out of the missing parts. So it'll be good. The slides are already up. I sent you the link just a minute ago, so if you want to go grab the slides, they're there and available.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.